Hello, fellow artists and art enthusiasts. Welcome to Where 2D and 3D Meet,
a podcast about art, what it is and what it means to us.
I'm Kelli Collins. I have a BFA in 2D Media.
And I'm Jenna Coffin. I have a BFA in Sculpture.
Have you ever looked at a piece of art and thought it looked so realistic, so lifelike, that it would come right off the paper or out of the frame? People often consider a good artist to be one who can copy the real world into their art. Show us recognizable objects and put them in proper proportions on the canvas. The ability to imitate real life in art is considered extremely impressive and is one of the first steps an artist takes to learn their craft. But is imitation the be-all, end-all of art?
Welcome to the first episode in our art philosophy series, an exploration of what art is and how we as a society think about it. To understand art better, we must first understand the cultural thoughts surrounding it. Today, we're starting all the way back in the classical period of Greece with Plato's theory of art as imitation. According to Plato, all art is imitation. Painting, poetry, sculpture, music, etc. All of it is merely an imitation.
Plato thought not just that all art was imitating reality, but that all of reality was imitation as well. All physical things, as well as thoughts and ideas, were merely imitations of the forms. Forms are the non-physical essence of all things, and through the imperfect reality we can only catch glimpses of these forms.
Thus, art is copying a copy, which leads one even further from the truth. Art also stirs up emotions, which are powerful motivators for people. These two things led Plato to believe that art is both powerful and dangerous. He stated that all artists should be banned from the Republic, or at least be heavily censored. Plato is not the only person to have thought that art is merely imitating reality. In fact, the theory of art as imitation persisted in Western thought until the 19th century.
To give you a little bit of an idea of what art as imitation might look like, we can start off with still lives. If you have any training in art, you know that the first thing they have you do is to draw still lives. These are usually objects placed in a square or rectangular box or area in which you can draw them or paint them. The most famous still lives are Dutch still lives. This is from the Netherlands and Germanic countries, and they are the most famous for being both the most realistic and also having memento mori, which is an indicator of all things must end.
So next you might think of trompe-l'oeil. These are kind of still lifes turned up to 11. They're meant to be as realistic as possible to maybe trick you into thinking that you're looking at a shadow box display rather than a painting. Popular items to include in the paintings would be paper, ribbon, quills, instruments, door keys, and other small objects that would go together. They were painted as though the viewer is looking down at a desk with the items placed on it, as though they'd just been used and left behind. There's also illusion drawings in this similar vein, like street drawings that use special perspective to make it look like there's a hole in the ground and you're looking down into it. You've probably seen those in chalk festivals and things like that.
One of the most famous trompe-l'oeil that I know, or perhaps not famous, but very, very convincing, surprisingly convincing considering it was using human forms, is the Church of St. Paulion in Venice, Italy. The
Pantaleon?
Pantaleon.
Pantaleon.
Pantaleon. Please correct us in the comments. He painted the ceiling of the church to look so realistic it looks like that the architecture continues into the painting, and you have these figures that are flying away and debating and yelling, and there's like a board that comes out that you don't realize that is actually a flat board. It literally looks like a person is hanging down from the architecture. It's pretty amazing that unless you get into very specific corners where the perspective kind of gets a little funky, it literally looks like people are up there.
And you got to see that in person, right?
Yes, yes, that's how I know that there are certain corners where the perspective gets a little funky,
Yeah.
because I did get to walk around the whole church other than the altar area.
On the photographs, which is all that I've seen, it's legitimately hard to tell where the architecture stops and the painting begins.
Yeah, it's you can say, there are these figures and they're not moving and they're people, and you can tell that they're not people because of that. But the architecture itself that is painted into the painting, trying to figure out like where the building stops and the painting begins, is exceedingly difficult. Talking about exceedingly difficult to tell reality from a painting or a piece of art, photography. So, photographs are like the quintessential imitation art. So much so that unless we see obvious signs that the photo's been doctored, we as a culture generally believe that the photo is an event that actually happened. This, of course, can have both pros and cons. Some of the cons might be having image issues due to seeing things on Vogue, people on Vogue, and how beautiful and thin they are, or how powerful and muscular they are. When in actuality, there's a lot of Photoshop going on in those kind of images. Some other pros might be of news events where we get to see actual things that happened be portrayed in a picture to showcase and bring emotions to an event that we might not care about. If you want to learn more about photography and our thoughts on it, check out this week's Patreon exclusive episode where we explore the medium in more depth. We put a sneak preview at the end of this episode.
Okay, so on to sculpture. There's several different ways now that sculpture is kind of done. And talking about art as imitation, we start with replication. So this is like portraiture, busts, that kind of thing, especially like before there was photographs and that kind of thing. Art was the only way to maintain your image for history. So wealthy people would commission paintings and sculptures of themselves. There's also artists who are still using replication today, copying things exactly how they are. I don't know if the artist I found as an example for this actually uses a model, or if she does the sculptures from her mind, but her works are exquisite. The artist is Luo Li Rong. You can look up one of her pieces, Autumnal. We'll put her links in the research document that you can look up if you're a patron. So she has just these beautiful pieces of women with flowing dresses, and they just look so gorgeous. Then you get to enhance. This is kind of how the Greek and Roman sculpture is they were looking for the ideal form, the perfect human body. So they would enhance the musculature of the models that they had and fix the proportions, and they would follow specific rules about how the proportions were supposed to be. The next thing is exaggerate, and my example for that is Giacometti. He makes these often bronze sculptures of human figures, and they're like stretched out, like elongated really extremely. So you can still recognize it as a person, but their legs are really, really long, and their feet are large and tapered, and so it's just like really exaggerated forms. But you can still say, yeah, that's a person, it's just a spaghetti man or whatever. Walking Man 2 is a famous piece of his. Then even further, you have fully abstract. Henry Moore is the artist for this, Reclining Figure in 1969. So some of his pieces you can tell are abstracted figures, and some of them you can't see the person that's in it until somebody says, "Oh, that's a figure," and then you can kind of pick out where the body parts are supposed to be. Like, oh yeah, that's probably the head. It must be facing this way, that kind of thing. But it's kind of hard to tell at first.
Okay, so let's get down to the discussion on art as imitation. And I want to start with actually the problems with imitation theory. What comes up as both like how does it fit with imitation theory, and sort of like what might kind of be the holes in this theory. So my first thought is, what does music represent, and such? According to Plato, the music represents emotions, but I'm not really sure that that can cover all of music as a whole. What are your thoughts, Jenna?
So he was saying that the emotion is the form in that case?
So yeah, emotion is like like music represents emotion, and so you are imitating emotion through music. And so like you could only catch glimpses of depression with music, and the essence of depression, like, so it would be imitating the emotion depression, which is in fact imitating the form of depression.
I see. So I feel like that's not enough of the story, right? Like, it can give you like visual images. Listening to a song, you can sometimes like see things happening, or maybe it makes you think of something that's not an emotion, and it will connect you to things you haven't seen or memories of things that you've seen. So I think
Yeah,
it's
so I
yeah, I think it's bigger
yeah, I
than
think
that.
it's yeah, that's what I was thinking, that it doesn't quite cover, like, music is definitely powerful, and definitely Plato thought music was possibly the most powerful of all arts. He hated it. My next thought was on Jackson Pollock and other exceedingly abstract work. When you get down to the point where there's no real figure that you're imitating with your art, what exactly does that cover with imitation theory?
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what Plato has to say about that, since he definitely wasn't alive for any abstract artists working. But I think that Pollock specifically was, if he was imitating anything, he was imitating kind of like masculine energy, is kind of what he was going for. So it was like action, but it was still like not creating something that you can visually see. It's not an emotion, it's more of a state.
Yeah, so those are kind of the holes that I've thought of for imitation theory, being the be all end all of art. So I would say that while there is some thought to imitation theory, that it doesn't cover everything.
Yeah.
So, what are the benefits and uses of imitating? Through imitation, what can we gain with art?
Yeah, so I feel like imitation is a good tool for learning about the world, learning to see. You look at
I
a
feel like
thing.
I feel like that's our degree. It's
Yeah,
just like
exactly.
the art. It's like our degree is in learning to see.
Learning to see. Exactly. When I was a kid, my dad, who's an art teacher, would say, you can do any art that you want, but if you start with what you see, then you'll have a good foundation. He said after that you can do cubism or pineappleism or whatever you want.
I mean, that comes down to just like it's just like the advice given to poets or to writers. Draw what or write what you
Write
know.
what you know, yeah.
Yeah, write what you know. It's the same kind of thing of draw what you see. That's what you start out with, and then once you kind of learn the rules, you can bend or break the rules on purpose instead of kind of accidentally doing it.
Right. And that helps you say more or say things stronger. If you know the foundations, then you can change them to evoke emotions, to
Say
bring new
whatever you're
ideas.
trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is a benefit to using imitation is recognizable forms for the viewer. That can make the message that you're trying to convey more clear. I mean, not everybody has the time or the wherewithal to go in depth on learning to see. They don't all get, art degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So I think using recognizable forms of reality can bring to mind those kind of inclusiveness, can bring inclusiveness into your work. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, people often complain about, oh, this abstract art, I don't get it. I don't know what it's doing. It's not for me. So if you have more recognizable, right, yeah. So if you have more recognizable shapes, then they can be like, oh yeah, I understand that you're talking about how beautiful this scenery is because you painted it very nicely. So especially before photography, the imitation art, like I said before, was used very much to communicate moments of in time, people, mostly people who had money, but to preserve their selves in the world. We even have sculptures of some slaves who their masters felt were important in Greece and Rome. They contributed important things, and their masters had busts of them made. So it's like a preservation of the history, and it can also like bring a moment or a perspective that you can then share back to the like scenery. You can paint this beautiful sunset, and people who weren't there with you can then get the pleasure and the beauty from it.
Yeah, and I mean nowadays we have cameras everywhere, and making we preserve those moments by taking a photograph of them and being able to remember and bring back those memories when you look back on those photographs is like really important. You are imitating and bringing back that moment that you had
Mm-hmm.
with your family, with your friends. And it's especially great for preserving people past their death. So yeah, bringing a moment of beauty or a moment in time in which you experience something to somebody else and sharing that, I think is a really great benefit for imitating.
So, what are the problems or the detriments of imitating?
Yeah, so detriments are with imitating. I definitely say that at least in the art world, the higher art world, sometimes depending on the person, putting actual recognizable imitated forms can be conceived as lesser art, not as high art, more of for the plebeians, or it can be considered less interesting, or something along those lines. So that could be a detriment depending on your own perspective and what you think as far as art is concerned
And your goals.
and your goals.
I feel like art that doesn't imitate can be a lot more expressive. Even if you just loosen the imitation a little bit, like with Impressionism, which would be like Monet, where it's more like painting roughly what's there very quickly so that you can get the feelings across, you can capture that moment quickly without having all the teeny details. You can still feel the water lilies and feel the peace of that area without having to know, that there's this many exact petals on each lily, on the lily pad. So it can be a lot more expressive if you let go a little, at least, of the imitation quality.
Yeah, so I think so that it just really depends on the artist itself on what they feel they need. But yeah, like if it can be more expressive in some ways. I think it just kind of depends on each individual artist to like decide on how true to what they are imitating, or not imitating they want to be. I guess another detriment might be that it might hold you back from experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
If you always paint or draw or photograph or whatever your particular art is, sculpt, the whatever you see, it might hold you back from, trying out new things, trying out some different ways of doing things and kind of getting outside your comfort zone.
Also, if you're going for imitation, if you're trying to make it look like something specific and you kind of miss the mark, then the viewers can kind of tell that you didn't get to where you were trying to go to. And that's not always a bad thing. We don't need to judge each other so harshly, I think. But if you're looking at a photorealistic drawing and you can see a spot where they didn't quite get it right, then I feel like sometimes maybe they're not as good as they say they are or whatever because they messed up this part. It is a little nitpicky, but I think it would
I
count as
mean,
a
like,
detriment.
for those of us that are trained to look,
Yeah.
especially, it can be kind of distracting. Like when you notice something is kind of off, and for example, this happens with female figures all the time. Just like you notice that their spine is not correct.
Yeah.
The whole like we wanted to show the boobs and the butt.
Oh, yeah. It's so
And
distracting.
so very distracting.
I've definitely stopped looking at or, like, stopped reading a comic or whatever because it has those distracting, incorrect proportions.
Especially when it comes down to like spinal things where I'm just like, that's not how spines work. Please stop.
Please stop.
You're hurting your poor character.
Where are her organs?
Where are her organs? That's another one. Where are her organs? So that can be especially distracting for those that know more about the proportions. Now, that's, of course, it depends on the audience, on what they're going to see.
Yeah.
And so those that are trained to see are going to be more distracted by those kind of imperfections than those that aren't trained to see necessarily. But, I mean, we as humans look at humans all the time. Like,
Yeah.
so often. There's a reason that classically trained artists are trained by drawing the figure. or painting the figure or sculpting the figure, because, and by the figure I mean the human body, because we look at humans so much that we can kind of instinctively know when we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And we may not know what we did wrong, but we know we did it wrong.
Yeah.
And that is super important to learning how to do it right.
Yeah, it can be really unsettling when you see something like this. Is the problem with robots right now, where they're trying to make them look more human, but you get into what's called the uncanny valley, where it looks too human but not human enough, and it gets really unsettling. That's why things like Slender Man are creepy, because his proportions are wrong and he doesn't have a face, and it's just really creepy, you know. So it
tingles in the back of your mind that it is wrong.
Wrong, yeah. You can be trying to say something nice and pretty, but your proportions are off, and so then it looks unsettling, and it messes with
what you were trying to convey.
With what you're trying to say, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I think we've covered pretty much everything that we want to talk about so far with art as imitation. What do you say, Jenna?
Yep, I think we're good. Please get into the comments and discuss this with us. I guess we can entertain Plato apologists if you'd want to come talk with us. That's fine.
Hey, we said some good things about art as imitation.
Yeah.
There's good things about art as imitation, just as there are cons to art as imitation.
Yeah.
Just you know, when it comes down to philosophers, they're always like, I'm always right and always 100% right all the time. And I really think that art and philosophy and things are a lot. Reality is just more nuanced than that.
Yeah. It's definitely good to think about, though. And we'll be adding more episodes to this series. I'm not sure how often we'll be doing art theory episodes, but definitely keep your eye out for them.
All right. Well, again, chat with us in the comments below, or if you are one of our Patreons, you can chat with us on our Discord. And we can't wait to hear from you guys.
We're so excited.
Yee!
That's the end of this episode. Stick around till the end for a sneak preview of the next Patreon exclusive episode. I'm Jenna Coffin.
And I'm Kelli Collins. Our amazing music and the editing for the podcast are done by Cadence of the Blade. You can find him on Twitch at twitch.tv/cadenceoftheblade.
If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at where2d and 3dmeet@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. If you'd like to see our artwork, you can find me at withkoji.com/@Jenna_Coffin.
And you can find me at kellykcollins.com. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you'd like to support us too, head over to patreon.com/where2d and 3dmeet, where you can get early access to episodes, join our Discord server for art discussions with us, and get exclusive episodes. Links can be found in the description below.
Thank you to all of you for listening. We hope you'll join us next episode, where 2D and 3D meet.
So learning, that's one of my favorite things about art, is learning as much as I can about each individual thing, and that's why I love this Patreon series, because we get to learn about all these different kinds of art, and I get to learn more. I got totally obsessed and went down a rabbit hole with the camera obscura because I hadn't understood that principle before, and Kelli was like, whoa, you gotta chill out.
It's just it's just the camera obscura, Jenna.
We can't talk about it for 30 whole minutes, so...
You need to cut this down. We're already at almost 40 minutes in this episode.
On the recording, yeah.
And that's the size.
It's fine.
It's fine. Everything is fine.